So things are working well. We have a nice harmony between our filtering, sorting, and paging, but it's not 100% the way we'd want it to be. For example, let me just show you here. If we come down, I don't know, I'm going to pick a doctor, and then we'll apply that filter, sort by age, right? Okay, so here's the thing. Let's say that Gregory House, he's just overwhelmed. So basically everybody who's 70 years or over, right, we're going to move them to a different primary care physician, right? So I can come in here, I've got my filter, my sorting ready to go. I can come in here and edit these records and say, okay, well, we're going to give that person to Charlie up here as their primary care physician. Oh, what a pain. I've come back to the index, but I have to come through, go through, get my filter set, okay? And so on, all over again, right? Actually, I think it was a different doctor. Yeah, no, the point is, okay, it's lost, right? So if I had multiple ones to do, I've got to come through, you might even be on a separate page. You want to come back to this page right after you've made an edit change. So if Ruth Ward here, if I edited her record and, did something in terms of her doctor, for example, save the change. Oh, here I am back, okay? And don't have the filter, I don't have the page I was on. Wouldn't it be nice if I was right on the exact same page that I just left, right? So that's the final kind of step that we're going to do to really bring everything together in terms of the trifecta of sorting, filtering, and paging to actually allow the system to remember, okay, what our last settings were, our parameters, right? I shouldn't have stopped yet. I meant to show you these parameters, right? You've probably noticed this, even just doing a sort. Look up at the URL, right? Here's parameters for everything from our page size to our sort direction and so on. And if we have a filter as well, I can apply that in addition, and you just see how all the parameters are up there. So really, that's the key to what we're about to do. The fact that our URL at this point in time is capturing all those parameter values, okay, for everything from our filtering and sorting and even what page we're on and everything else, right, is all right there. So that's what we're going to do is we're going to find a way to grab that information and persist it somehow, right? Okay, so let me come back to our utilities folder here, because that's what we're going to do is we're going to add yet another little helper class for us, right? So I'm going to right click, we'll add a class. I'm going to call this one maintain URL, right? Because that's where all that valuable parameter information is stored. So it's going to be a static class. Our little helper here. Okay. And as I say in my summary comments, maintain the URL for an index view, including all the filter, sort, page information, right? Now, it does depend on our cookie helper utility, okay? So we have that, but we have that in place, okay? A bit of a warning there. This is designed to work with our default route. Now that should take you back right near the beginning. I talked about this, that in our program.cs down here is where the map controller route, here our default route is defined as being controller/action/ the route value ID, etc., right? Now, just mentioning that if you do ever change from this, then you might have to make adjustment in the approach here, right? But we're based on that, controller/action, etc., right? So coming into our return URL here, I pass in our HTTP context. That's necessary in order to access any URLs that are being passed around. And of course, we're also trying to do everything based on each controller separately, right? So each set of cookies, controller will have its own cookies for this, that, and the other thing. All right, so I'm going to develop a name for the cookie because cookies do need to be unique. So that'll be a combination of controller name, and I'm just going to slap on the letters URL at the end. I'm defining some search text because I have to be able to look in the URL itself and see whether or not there are any parameters. So I'm going to look for / the controller name and then question mark, because the question mark comes before any key value pairs in the parameters themselves, right? So here's the thing. I come to my context, go to the request in the headers. I can check for the referrer, right? That's the page that referred us to where we're going, right? That's the page we just came from, okay? So I toString that whole thing to get my return URL, and then I check to see if it contains my search text. In other words, does it have, okay, parameters, right? Okay, so if it does, and I come in here, I have an index with some parameters, so I'm going to save the parameters in a cookie. So what I'm going to do is take the return URL as it is, last index of, okay, so I find where slash the controller name question mark lies inside of it, right? And that gives me my return URL. I store that with my cookie helper, okay, with my cookie name, the controller name URL, and that return URL for 30 minutes. I figured that's good enough. Okay. All right, so then I just return the URL as well. So this method will actually return a static string, and away we go. Now, if we didn't come from, okay, an index with parameters, then we're going to check for the cookie, okay? It's probably there already, right, if there were any filter parameters set, okay? So we'll get it from the cookie, so we just go into our request.cookies, pull it out by the cookie name, right, which is our controller URL, okay? And then we just return that. Now, of course, if there is nothing there, then basically we're just going to go back to the controller, right? And that'll go to the default, the index of it. So that's good. So we always have something to return to from our maintain URL. Okay, now, how are we going to tie that in? Well, the whole idea, of course, we're going to save the URL from the index view with all the parameters so we can return there. But it's really going to be a job of the controller to make all this available to us. Remember we did our work earlier where we created our own custom controller. Our cognizant controller was the one that was self-aware, knowing, having these properties we could access with the name of the controller, the name of the action that was just called, and so on. Well, before we go on to the next step of actually having our controller remember all this route information and the parameters to go along with it, what we're going to do is we're going to add a few more bits of functionality here just to our cognizant controller itself, okay? So in addition to what's there, let me come down here. I'm going to add, well, first of all, this is just a little utility. I could have it in its own separate class, but I only ever use it here so far, so I've left it inside this one. It just splits camel case. In other words, if we have a capital letter at the beginning of each word, but there's no spaces between the words, it just spaces them out for us, right? That's really all it does. Okay. Now here, both on action executing and then asynchronous version, okay? We're going to override. So we're going to say, okay, you want to execute an action, but let me do this first. Then at the end, I'll go to the base and say, go ahead and carry on with what you would normally do, right? Same thing for asynchronous. But in the meantime, I'm basically going to take the opportunity to add a whole bunch of really helpful information which can be used to enhance the feedback being given to the client on the views themselves. So I'm going to throw this into view data. I'll have the controller name there, the friendly version, just in case there is multiple words glued together in camel case, right? Then I have the friendly name of the controller. The action name, I sometimes want it in lowercase, so I might as well do that now. And then also view data title. Where have we seen that before? Well, we've pretty much seen it on top of every one of our views, right? Come down here, view data title. Let's provide something for the layout to have in the tab up at the top, right? So we're going to provide controller friendly name, action name. So it might be like patient edit, right? Or doctor delete, whatever that is. And that can be the title. So that's a little more explanatory, right? Okay, and then we just carry on with the default on action execution behaviors. Okay, so now we've just added a lot more information available all the time from our cognizant controller. So what are we going to do next? Well, not every controller is going to have filtering, sorting, and or paging, right? So to allow us to kind of separate, instead of putting it all in one, I'm going to make another custom controller. So I'm going to add a class here. I'm going to call this variation a elephant controller, because let's face it, elephants have a great memory. They're known for that, aren't they? Right? So let me just get my code. Now, what will elephant controller inherit from? It's going to inherit right from our cognizant controller. But don't worry, cognizant controller, of course, inherits from our base controller class. So all the goods from the base class, the cognizant as well, are all available here inside of our elephant controller. My summary comments, the alpha controller has a good memory to help persist the index, sort, filter, and paging parameters, right, into a URL stored in view data. Okay, just a warning there that we depend on cookie helper and maintain URL, but we have those utilities in place already. So we're good. So we come in here, and what else is going to happen? Well, I'm preparing, first of all, a string array of action words, you might say, to respond to, right? They should look familiar. Details, create, edit, delete. You might say, well, what's add, update, and remove? Why are they being added to this list? Well, later on in the course, there'll be times when I encourage this practice, that if I have a controller that, although we're still carrying out CRUD operations, takes a very different approach to the whole situation, what I'll do sometimes is change the action verbs that I use inside the controller to add, update, and remove. It just helps me be aware and reminds me as I'm working in the controller that we've changed our approach in some way, right? So I want to include those actions in my string array here of verbs, you might say. Okay? So that's why they're there, in case you're wondering. And you can always customize this if you end up, having other verbs that you want to respond to as well, right? Okay. So it's basically repeated for both on action and on action asynchronous, okay? But we're overriding one more time here. We grab our context, and what we can do is we can check if our list of action URLs here, action with URL, contains the action name, right? So the actual action that was requested. Is it one of the ones in this list that I created at the top? If it is, I'm going to add in view data, a return URL, that's the key, and the value will be the one returned by maintain URL little utility, my helper, okay? We pass, of course, the context and the controller name, and that will get us our return URL, and we just throw it into view data so it's available later on. Mind you, if the action is index, okay, well, all right, basically what we want to do in this case is we want to clear, right, any sort, filter, and paging parameters, right, and just go right back to the actual index, and we don't want to save anything anymore. We want to remove that history. So I can do that with my cookie helper by basically deleting the cookie. How am I deleting it? Well, basically setting a negative lifespan is one way to actually just get rid of the cookie. There are other ways as well. I'll be honest and share with you, but I find this just works, so I've stuck with it. Okay, and basically the same thing happens down here. So the real thing is we're adding this return URL into view data, right? Okay, now that's good. So we've got all that in place. I'm just going to close everything up here. Well, I might as well keep the patient controller open. And I might, at the same time, might as well open the doctor controller, because I have at least paging here on the doctor controller as well. So I'm going to modify each of these to no longer be just a cognizant controller, but also an elephant controller. And then now they will have the return URL available in view data, okay, as a result of being an elephant controller, as well as all those other good things that we added, controller names and action names and so on earlier on. So how then do we implement this in terms of the functionality? Well, let's come down here. I'm going to use the patient controller first of all, right? Let's go down to the action, the posts for all of our actions. I'm going to go to the bottom and start with delete. Right now, after we have confirmed that we've actually deleted the record, okay, we saved changes, our try block is happy, we didn't have any exceptions. What do we normally do? Return, redirect to action, name of index, right? Go back to the index action. Okay, but what I want to do now is I want to use my return URL, okay? But I have to be careful because I may not actually have one. So a couple extra lines of code just for those of us who are paranoid sometimes to make sure I actually have something to work with. I'll do it this way. I'll get my return URL. I'll go into view data to grab it, okay? Converting it to a string, right? And then, okay, string is null or empty. In other words, if I don't actually have the return URL, then I'm going to do what I was doing before, redirect to action index, okay? But if I do have a return URL, quite likely with all my parameters for sorting, filtering, and paging, then I just say return redirect and then return using my return URL to go back. Okay, that's perfect. So now after I delete, I'll go back where I left off in terms of how the index was arranged, right? Now I could do the same thing here, okay, and edit. So I could just put the exact same code in the post for edit and with create, okay? So the post for create. Instead of just going back to index, no, I'm going to go back using my return URL if that's available. All right. Okay. Well, let's just quickly do the same thing in the Docker controller. So I'll come down here to the post for delete. I could have done like a global search and replace type of thing, but really something like this is just a few specific spots. It doesn't hurt to go through the process. Okay, here's my post for edit, right? Oh, now this is interesting, okay? What I'm doing here, remember we had talked about this before. The idea is redirect to action, going to detail. So after making an edit change, or even create, okay, you might do it in create. If your index view doesn't show everything, right, then this is the kind of thing you might want to do, okay? So let me just actually replace this, though, with our code, because the truth is, I don't know why I did that in the Docker controller, to be honest with you. I think I was just demonstrating it was a possibility. But the thing is, with the Docker, everything shows on the index view. There's only the first, middle, and last name, so there's really no need to go separately to the details view, right? So they're all set up now to return to my index. Okay, so let's see if that actually works.